Welcome to the Night Library Archive. Tonight, it's time to leave the noise of the world and the busy thoughts of the day at the doorstep. In the quiet corridors of our archive, we are opening a new chapter just for you. You are about to embark on a journey that transcends time, a journey designed to rest your soul. You are safe, you are comfortable, and now, you only hear the rhythm of my voice and the soothing atmosphere around you. Now, adjust your pillow. Pull up your blanket, and gently close your eyes. Our story begins, and you are drifting toward the most peaceful shores of sleep. Then let us begin again, slowly, and from farther away. Before the pass, before the armies, before the names that would outlive the men who carried them, there was only land and water. A narrow stretch of earth pressed between mountain and sea. On one side, steep rock rising in hard silence. On the other, restless salt water breathing in and out against stone. In certain places, hot springs bled steam into the air, as if the earth itself exhaled. It was not a place meant for history. It was a place meant for wind. For generations, shepherds walked there without thinking of destiny. Traders crossed it, counting their coins. Fishermen looked inland and saw nothing but rock. No one who stood there in peace could have guessed that one day the ground would carry the weight of an empire. Far to the east, beyond seas and deserts, beyond cities built of glazed brick and gold, another wind was moving. In Susa and Persepolis, in halls where stone columns rose like forests, Xerxes sat upon a throne carved for dominion. He had inherited an empire that stretched wider than imagination. From the Indus to the Aegean, from Egypt's riverbanks to the cold plateaus of Anatolia, countless peoples paid tribute to the same crown. But empire does not grow quiet once it has grown large. It hungers. There had been a previous attempt. His father had marched west and met resistance. A storm had shattered ships. A battle had been lost at Marathon. The memory of it lingered like an unfinished sentence. Xerxes would complete it. When the order went out, it traveled across languages and landscapes. Satraps received sealed commands. Messengers rode through dust and heat. Each province would contribute men. Archers from the plains. Cavalry from the steppes. Infantry from fertile valleys. Engineers, craftsmen, supply trains. Some answered with pride. Some with fear. Most with resignation. Among them was a young man from a village near Sardis. He was not noble. He was not ambitious. He had hands hardened by farming and a back shaped by labor. When the call came, he did not question it. He tied his belongings in cloth and followed the column gathering at the edge of his town. His mother placed a hand against his chest before he left. Not dramatically. Not as in stories. Just a steady touch. "Come back," she said. He nodded, because sons nod. He did not yet know the name Thermopylae. The army assembled like a moving city. Tents, animals, carts, armor, banners snapping in dry wind. From above, it would have looked like a slow river of metal and dust flowing westward. When they reached the Hellespont, he saw something that made him believe no force in the world could stop them. Bridges built across the sea. Not metaphorical bridges. Not dreams. Wooden ropes stretched from shore to shore, held together by human will. Waves struck against them, but they held. Men marched across water. If a king could command the sea to bear his weight, what could possibly deny him land? The crossing felt like stepping into inevitability. Weeks passed. Then months. The landscape shifted from wide openness to narrowing corridors. The army moved through Thessaly, past towns that submitted or fled. Smoke sometimes marked resistance. Often it did not. Rumors spread ahead of them, a Greek alliance forming, small and fragile. City-states that rarely agreed on anything now bound together by fear. The young soldier listened to older men talk by firelight. "They are divided," one said. "They argue among themselves." "They are few," said another. "Few is not nothing," replied a third, staring into flames. The first time he heard the word Thermopylae, it was spoken casually. A pass. A narrow one. A good defensive point. The generals were not concerned. When they arrived, the land seemed unimpressive. Narrow, yes, but nothing more. A strip of earth between mountain and sea. Ahead stood a small wall of stone, hastily repaired. Beyond it, a line of men. Not many. The young soldier squinted beneath the sun. Bronze helmets glinted. Long spears stood angled like a field of metal reeds. He expected them to break at the sight of the vast Persian host. To scatter. They did not. The first attack was ordered almost as a formality. He was in the second wave. From behind, the advance felt powerful. Thousands moving as one. Shields overlapping. Orders shouted in a dozen dialects. Then the space tightened. The pass did not allow width. It swallowed numbers. What had seemed like overwhelming force narrowed into a funnel. The front ranks met the Greeks. The sound was not glorious. It was dense. Wood striking wood. Metal scraping bronze. Breath forced from lungs. A kind of grinding pressure. The men in front could not retreat easily. Those behind could not see clearly. The young soldier felt himself pressed forward by bodies he did not know. Then the screams began. Not many at first. Then more. He glimpsed the enemy through gaps in shoulders and helmets. They stood shoulder to shoulder. Their shields locked. Their spears moving in rhythm. They did not charge wildly. They did not panic. They moved like something practiced. A man directly ahead of him jerked backward, a spear through his throat. Blood sprayed hot and immediate. The body fell, and the line adjusted without hesitation. The young soldier raised his shield higher. He had imagined war as a surge. Instead, it was a push. They withdrew that day bloodied and confused. Back in camp, no one laughed. The second day was worse. Elite troops were sent in, the so-called immortals. Their armor polished. Their discipline unquestioned. But the pass remained narrow. And the Greeks remained. The young soldier watched from a slight rise as wave after wave collided with that bronze wall. He began to understand something uncomfortable. The Greeks were not trying to win. They were trying to hold. It is a different kind of intention. Holding does not require victory. It requires endurance. At night, whispers moved through camp. There was a mountain path. A shepherd had revealed it. A way around. Hope returned cautiously. The young soldier was not chosen for the flanking movement. He watched others depart under moonlight, silent shapes against dark stone. In the morning, everything changed. The attack began again from the front. But this time, shouts rose from behind the Greek position. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Some withdrew. Some did not. He saw a group remain near the center. They fought differently now. Less measured. More fierce. As if they understood the shape of their ending. He saw a tall figure without fear, commanding even as the line tightened. He did not know that he was looking at a king. The circle closed. Arrows darkened the sky. The Greeks fought with shorter weapons once their spears broke. Swords. Even hands. When it ended, the pass was theirs. But the air did not feel victorious. Too many bodies. Too much cost. He stepped carefully among the fallen. Greek and Persian indistinguishable in death except for armor. He found himself staring at one of the defenders. The man's face was younger than expected. Almost calm. Why had he stayed? The question lodged in his mind. The army moved on. Athens would burn. The campaign would continue. But something had shifted. Invincibility had cracked. Later, at Salamis, he would not be present. But he would hear its ships shattered in narrow water, of a fleet undone by its own size. And later still, at Plataea, he would hear that the land army had been broken. When at last he returned home, thinner and quieter, his mother asked what he had seen. He did not speak of empire. He spoke of a narrow place between mountain and sea. He spoke of men who did not run. He did not call them heroes. He did not call them fools. He only said, they knew. Years passed. Children grew up hearing stories reshaped by distance. In Greece, the number 300 hardened into legend. In Persia, the campaign became one chapter among many. But the pass remained. Wind still moved between rock and water. The land forgot the blood quickly. Grass returned. Stones cooled. Only memory persisted, carried not by the ground but by those who walked it. And so the story continued, not as a tale of victory or defeat, but as a question that refused to die. What makes men stand when standing means death? What makes an empire believe it cannot be stopped? And what happens when both beliefs meet in a place too narrow for either to pass untouched? The night before the end did not feel like legend. There were no omens written across the sky, no thunder splitting the dark, no divine voice descending from the mountains. There was only the sound of men settling into uneasy rest and the slow breathing of the sea. Leonidas stood apart from the firelight. The pass was quiet in a way that did not comfort. He had lived long enough to know the difference between peace and pause. This was a pause. Word had come before dusk. The mountain path had been taken. A shepherd had guided the Persians through the high ground. The circle would close at dawn. Some of the allies had already gone. He had sent them. Not in shame. Not in fear. In clarity. This was no longer a defensive maneuver. This was a decision. He could have withdrawn fully. He knew it. The narrowness of the pass had protected them, but now the advantage was gone. To remain meant certain death. He watched the remaining Spartans as they cleaned their armor. They did not tremble. They did not argue. They moved with a familiarity that bordered on ritual. Sharpening blades, adjusting straps, passing water skins hand to hand. They had known, from the day they left Sparta, that this might be the end. Spartan kings did not rule as tyrants. They ruled under law, under custom, under expectation. He thought of the oracle. The words that had reached him before the campaign: either Sparta would fall, or a king of Sparta would die. He had not believed in prophecy as superstition, but he understood its weight. It was not prediction. It was framing. The choice had been given shape before he ever marched north. He knelt and touched the earth. It was warm from the springs. Even at night, the ground here seemed alive. He tried to imagine retreat, to picture himself returning to Sparta after abandoning the pass. The faces that would meet him. The silence. Spartans did not measure courage by survival. They measured it by obedience to law. And the law was clear. Stand. He walked back toward the fire. A few of the younger men looked at him, searching his face for something. Assurance. Doubt. Permission. He gave them none of those things. Instead, he sat. One of them, scarcely more than a boy, spoke first. They will surround us at dawn. Yes, Leonidas said. There was no use in softening truth. Another man laughed quietly. Not with hysteria. With something like relief. Good, he said. No more waiting. Leonidas understood that laugh. Waiting is heavier than fighting. He removed his helmet and set it beside him. The bronze caught the firelight, reflecting a distorted image of his face. Older than when he had first taken up arms. Lined not by fear but by repetition. He thought of Sparta. Of the red dust of the training grounds. Of boys wrestling in silence. Of mothers who did not cry when sons marched away. He thought of his wife. Not in dramatic farewell, but in the simple memory of her presence in a doorway, watching him leave without asking him to stay. She had known. He had known she knew. That was enough. Across the darkness, the Persian camp glowed faintly. Thousands of men. Thousands of fires. A living constellation on the earth. Somewhere among them were soldiers who did not hate him, who did not even know him. They had been ordered west just as he had been ordered north. War was not personal. It was directional. He lay back briefly, looking up at the sky. The stars were untroubled. He wondered how many of the men around him were afraid. All of them, he suspected. Fear was not weakness. It was information. The difference lay in what one did with it. He rose before dawn. There was no speech. No grand address. Spartans did not need to be told what they were. They formed their line in the half-light, shields touching, spears angled forward. The first Persian wave came as expected. But this time, the Spartans advanced. They moved beyond the narrowest choke point, striking harder, faster. Not conserving strength, spending it. Leonidas felt the impact in his arms as shields collided. Felt the familiar shock travel through bone and muscle. He killed without hatred. He did not count. He did not shout. He moved as he had been trained to move since childhood. When the Persian forces pressed harder, he sensed the shift. The weight increasing. The sides tightening. Somewhere in the chaos, he was struck. Not a clean blow. A glancing cut. Pain flared, bright and immediate. He did not fall. He saw one of his captains go down, pierced through the chest. Another stepped into the space without hesitation. The ring closed tighter. Spears broke. Swords flashed. Arrows began to fall in heavier numbers. Someone near him shouted that the rear was lost. He did not turn. He understood. This was the shape of the end. He felt another strike, deeper this time. His breath shortened. The world narrowed not from terrain but from blood loss. He remained standing as long as his legs allowed. In that narrowing space, in that tightening circle of bronze and dust, there was no prophecy. No glory. Only choice fulfilled. He thought, fleetingly, of Sparta. Not as a city. As continuity. As something that would outlive him because he did not step aside. When he finally fell, it was not theatrical. He stumbled. Knees hit earth. The ground was still warm. Around him, his men fought harder. Not to win. To protect his body. The struggle over him was fierce and desperate. He would not be left to dishonor. Above, arrows darkened the sky. The final moments dissolved into noise and impact and heat. Then silence. Not immediate silence. The kind that follows after enough men have died. The Persians would claim the pass. The Greeks would retreat. Athens would burn. Salamis would rise. Plataea would decide. But in that moment, in that narrow strip of earth between mountain and sea, the story was not about outcome. It was about refusal. Years later, travelers would stand there and read words carved in stone. Stranger, tell the Spartans that we lie here, obedient to their laws. They would read it and imagine certainty. But certainty is constructed afterward. On that morning, there was only clarity. A line drawn not in ink but in bodies. And a king who chose not to step back. Time did not stop at the pass. It rarely does for the places where men die believing something immense is happening. The ground cools. The flies come. The armor is stripped. The bodies are counted, or not counted. Orders move on to the next objective. The Persian army did not linger long in mourning or awe. The pass had been taken. The road south lay open. The machinery of campaign resumed its rhythm. Athens would soon burn. But even in victory, a small unease moved quietly through the ranks. The soldiers who had stood in that narrow corridor carried something away with them. Not fear exactly. Not admiration exactly. Something harder to name. the idea that resistance could be absolute. Athens was evacuated before the Persian host arrived. The city was not defended in the same way as the pass. Its people had made a different choice. They left. They boarded ships. They watched smoke rise behind them as their temples were desecrated, their homes reduced to ash. Some wept. Some did not look back. The Acropolis burned. Xerxes sat upon a temporary throne and observed the destruction, believing the campaign to be nearing its inevitable conclusion. But fire consumes more than stone. It consumes assumptions. The Greek fleet waited at Salamis. Themistocles understood something Xerxes did not fully grasp. Narrow water can do what narrow land does. A large fleet in open sea is power. In confined straits, it becomes obstruction. When the Persian ships advanced into the channel, their numbers became confusion. Oars tangled. Commands overlapped. Visibility narrowed. Greek triremes struck from angles. The sea churned with wood and men and screams. Those who had survived the pass heard of it later. The sea had done what the mountain had done. Reduced vastness to vulnerability. The Persian fleet fractured. Xerxes watched from a height as ships splintered and sank. Invincibility thinned further. The empire did not collapse. It did not need to. It recalibrated. Xerxes returned east, leaving Mardonius to continue the campaign on land. Another year passed. Fields ripened and were trampled. Cities weighed allegiance. Plataea became the final ground confrontation. By then, Thermopylae was no longer just an event. It was a reference. When Greek soldiers stood in line at Plataea, they remembered the pass. They remembered that men had held against impossible odds. They remembered that numbers can be forced into narrowness. And when Mardonius fell and the Persian land forces broke, the arc that began in that tight corridor bent toward completion. The invasion ended not in one clash but in accumulation. Thermopylae had not saved Greece alone. It had bought breath. Breath enough for strategy. Breath enough for unity. Breath enough for belief. Years turned into decades. Athens rose high in confidence, building walls and fleets, turning alliance into empire. Sparta maintained its austere discipline, slower to change, resistant to innovation. The unity forged under threat did not last. Greek fought Greek. The Peloponnesian War consumed a generation. And yet, even as they clashed among themselves, both sides invoked the memory of standing against Persia. Memory became currency. Thermopylae became symbol. The number 300 hardened into simplicity. The complexities, the Thespians who stayed, the allies who withdrew by order, the Persian soldiers who died unnamed, faded at the edges. Myth prefers clean lines. History resists them. Centuries later, Rome would study Greek history as inheritance. Roman writers would recount the stand at the pass as an example of discipline and sacrifice. They saw in it something of themselves. Still later, in eras far removed from bronze and shield, the story would be retold again and again. Each generation would polish it to suit its own needs. Sometimes it would become a tale of freedom against tyranny. Sometimes of martial virtue. Sometimes of nationalism. The pass itself changed. Sediment shifted the shoreline. The sea receded. What had once been a narrow choke point widened slightly over time. Geography itself softened the drama, but not enough to erase it. Travelers could still stand there and sense constriction. Mountain on one side, open horizon on the other. A place where choice becomes visible. The Persian soldier from Sardis grew old. His hair thinned. His hands thickened with new labor. He told his grandchildren about marching across water, about the heat of Greek sun, about the strange courage of men who did not flee. He did not speak of glory. He spoke of narrowness. Too many of us, he would say, for a place that's small. He had learned that power has limits shaped by terrain and by resolve. In Sparta, mothers still raised sons under the old discipline. But the world was changing. Gold flowed differently. Trade expanded. Ideas traveled. No law remains untouched by time. Yet the inscription endured in one form or another. Stranger, tell the Spartans we lie here obedient to their laws. Obedience. It is a word that can mean submission or conviction. In that pass, it meant alignment between belief and action. Leonidas did not seek martyrdom for spectacle. He sought consistency. Consistency between what Sparta claimed to value and what it was willing to lose. That consistency echoed. Not because it was perfect. Not because it was pure. Because it was visible. In every age, there are moments when retreat is rational and resistance is costly. Thermopylae became the shorthand for choosing cost. And so the story, slowly, without banners or speeches, found its resting place not in stone, but in human habit. Whenever a smaller force faces a larger one, whenever a line holds longer than expected, whenever delay becomes decisive, the wind moves again between mountain and sea. And even if the names are forgotten, the pattern remains. An empire advances. A narrow place waits. Men decide. The rest is consequence. History does not move in straight lines. It bends. It loops. It forgets and remembers selectively. What once seemed decisive can fade, and what seemed minor can grow until it defines an era. Thermopylae was, in military terms, a defeat. That is the simplest truth. The pass fell. The defenders died. The invading army continued south. And yet, it refuses to live in memory as a defeat. Why? Because human beings rarely remember events only by outcome. We remember them by meaning. Thermopylae became a story about standing. About choosing a position and refusing to abandon it even when the cost was visible. That kind of story travels well. It crosses centuries easily. It fits inside other struggles. The Greeks did not suddenly become united saints of liberty after the Persian Wars. They argued, they betrayed, they fought one another. Athens built an empire of its own and demanded tribute from allies who had once stood beside it in fear. Sparta clung to old structures and resisted change, sometimes at the cost of adaptability. But something had shifted permanently. Before the Persian invasions, many Greek city-states had assumed that a massive empire could simply absorb them. It had happened elsewhere. Why not here? After Thermopylae and Salamis and Plataea, the assumption cracked. Resistance was not just possible, it could be effective. That psychological change mattered. It allowed Athens to experiment with democracy in ways that required confidence. It allowed philosophers to question authority in a culture not entirely dominated by a single imperial structure. It allowed playwrights to stage tragedies that explored power, fate, and defiance. None of that emerged solely because of one battle. History is never so simple. But confidence in survival is a fertile ground for creativity. Persia, too, learned. Empires do not fall every time they lose a campaign. They adjust. The Achaemenid Empire remained vast and sophisticated long after the Greek wars. It continued to influence trade, culture, governance. But the myth of absolute inevitability weakened. Even the greatest structures encounter limits. Centuries later, when Alexander of Macedon marched east, he would inherit not only military knowledge but psychological precedent. A Greek force confronting Persia was no longer unthinkable. The imagination had already crossed that threshold. And imagination is a precursor to action. Thermopylae also left a quieter legacy. It reminds us that geography shapes history. The narrowness of the pass was not symbolic at first. It was physical. Rock and water created constraint. Constraint shaped strategy. Strategy shaped outcome. Human courage mattered. But so did terrain. It is tempting to romanticize the stand as pure willpower. But willpower alone does not stop armies. Position does. Understanding that balance between human choice and environmental reality is part of the deeper lesson. In every era, there are Thermopylaes. Not literal mountain passes, but moments when circumstances narrow options. When retreat seems safer, when standing seems costly. Most of those moments pass without inscription. No stone marks the private decisions that shape ordinary lives. But the pattern is the same. There is a narrowing. There is a weighing of consequence. There is a choice. The men at the pass did not know how they would be remembered. They did not fight for centuries of myth. They fought because the law of their city, the expectations of their upbringing, and their own internal alignment left them with one acceptable path. That alignment between identity and action is what gives the story its endurance. It is easy to admire courage from a distance. It is harder to live within a system that demands it. Sparta built such a system. It was harsh. It was unforgiving. It produced resilience and rigidity in equal measure. Athens built a different system. It allowed argument and innovation, but it also produced instability and ambition. Persia built an empire capable of spanning continents, integrating cultures under administrative sophistication unmatched in its time. None of these systems were simple. Thermopylae did not prove one superior to the others. It exposed their edges. Sparta's strength lay in discipline. That discipline could hold a line against overwhelming odds. Persia's strength lay in scale. That scale could project force across seas. Athens' strength lay in adaptability. That adaptability could exploit opportunity in narrow waters. The collision at the pass was not good versus evil. It was structure meeting structure. human beings caught in between. And so the wind continues. If you walk there at dusk, when light softens the rock and the sea darkens into a single sheet of quiet metal, it is difficult to imagine the density of what once happened. The past feels almost too small to have carried so much weight. That is the final irony. History often feels enormous in the moment and fragile afterward. A clash that shook two worlds now occupies a strip of land a person can cross in minutes. No drumbeat remains. No arrow darkens the sky. Only the awareness that once, in a place this narrow, men decided not to step aside. They did not stop an empire by strength alone. They did not save a civilization in a single morning. They bought time. They reshaped confidence. They forced power to reckon with resistance. And then they died. Everything that followed, the burning of cities, the clash of fleets, the arguments of philosophers, the construction of myths, unfolded partly in the shadow of that decision. But the decision itself was simple. Stay. In the end, Thermopylae is not a story about conquest or even victory. It is a story about the human threshold, the point at which retreat remains possible, yet something deeper insists on standing firm. Every era has such thresholds. Most pass unnoticed. A few are remembered. This one endured because it captured a pattern older than any empire, the meeting of force and boundary. The empire pushed forward. The land narrowed. Men chose. The wind carries no judgment. It does not praise the Spartans or condemn the Persians. It does not recite inscriptions or replay speeches. It moves between mountain and sea the way it always has. Indifferent. Enduring. And in that indifference lies the final quiet truth. The past remains. The men do not. But the choice echoes, not because it was perfect, not because it was pure, but because it was made fully, without turning away. And that, more than bronze or stone, is what history remembers. And yet, even silence has layers. If you remain at the past long enough, not as a visitor checking a landmark off a list, but as someone willing to linger, something else begins to settle in. It is not the memory of names. It is not even the memory of battle. It is the weight of scale. To the men who stood there, the world felt immediate and immense. The approaching army seemed endless. The decision to remain felt absolute. The sky overhead felt close, heavy with consequence. But from a wider distance, from centuries away, everything compresses. The invasion becomes a chapter, the battle becomes a paragraph, the men become a number. 300. And yet that number does not hold the full truth. It never did. There were others who remained and died. There were others who fought and withdrew by command, not cowardice. There were Persian soldiers who never understood the political ambitions behind their march, only the forward pressure of orders. History prefers clean edges. It sands away the irregularities. But the real story is uneven. It contains doubt. It contains confusion. It contains exhaustion. It contains men who wanted to live and chose not to run. Thermopylae, in its final form, is less about heroism and more about friction. Friction between land and sea, between empire and city-state, between fear and discipline, between instinct and identity. The Persian Empire did not fall because of that friction. It endured long after. It governed, traded, adapted. Sparta did not become a golden civilization because of that stand. It remained rigid, eventually outpaced by changing times. Athens did not become pure because it survived. It became powerful, then arrogant, then vulnerable. No side emerged untouched. But the memory of the narrow stand endured because it illuminated something constant in human history. Power grows until it meets resistance shaped by terrain and belief. And belief, once proven viable, spreads. The idea that an immense force could be slowed, even temporarily, reshaped the psychological landscape of the Mediterranean world. It altered calculations. It made future confrontations imaginable. It planted a seed of defiance that would surface again and again in different forms. Centuries later, when Rome faced overwhelming odds in distant campaigns, its historians would recall the Greeks. When small states resisted larger ones in later ages, writers would invoke that narrow pass. When modern nations searched for symbols of sacrifice, they would reach backward and find Leonidas standing against a horizon of numbers. Myth is not false. It is concentrated. It distills complexity into a shape the mind can hold. Thermopylae became that shape. But if we strip the myth back to its simplest frame, what remains is not grandeur. It is proximity. Men so close to one another that their shields touched. Men so close to the sea that they could hear waves even as they heard steel. Men so close to death that the future narrowed to a single breath at a time. In that narrowing, something clarifies. The world reduces to the space directly in front of you. The decision reduces to a single direction, forward or back. And once forward is chosen, there is no further argument. The empire marched on. The cities burned and were rebuilt. Generations passed who no longer felt the immediacy of the invasion. But the past stayed. Geography outlasts memory, yet sometimes memory fuses with geography. Thermopylae is not sacred because of terrain alone. It is sacred because terrain and decision intersected there in a way that revealed human limits. Limits of expansion. Limits of endurance. Limits of fear. And limits, paradoxically, are what define shape. An empire without limit spreads until it fractures. A person without limit dissolves into impulse. A pass without limit would not have forced a choice. The narrowness created clarity. Clarity created consequence. And consequence created memory. If you step back even further, beyond Greece, beyond Persia, the event becomes one example among many of a recurring pattern in human existence. There is always an advance. There is always resistance. There is always a place where the vast meets the constrained. Sometimes the vast overwhelms. Sometimes the constrained reshapes the vast. Thermopylae was not unique in structure. It was unique in endurance. Because something about that moment, that combination of scale, stubbornness, and sacrifice resonated deeply enough to survive translation across time. Empires fade. Cities crumble. Bronze corrodes. But stories that capture a human threshold endure. And so the past remains not as a monument to victory or loss, but as a mirror. When we look at it, we are not only looking backward. We are asking ourselves, where are our narrow places? Where do we stand because retreat would unravel who we believe ourselves to be? Where do we choose delay over surrender, knowing that delay may be all that is possible? The wind does not answer. It moves as it always has, indifferent to interpretation. But the fact that we still ask means the echo continues. And that echo, carried through centuries of retelling, is perhaps the final victory of that narrow strip of land between mountain and sea. The empire advanced. The pass narrowed. Men stood. History widened again. And the wind kept moving. And if we follow that widening long enough, the battle dissolves entirely into abstraction. A pattern, a principle, a line in the long mathematics of power. But abstraction is comfortable. It removes the weight of breath and bone. So let us come back, one last time, not to the clash, not to the king, but to the human residue left behind. Imagine a boy in Sparta, born years after the pass fell. He grows up hearing the story not as shock, but as inheritance. The names are recited as naturally as family lineage. Leonidas is not distant, he is instructional. The boy trains under the same unforgiving sun. He learns to endure hunger, to move in formation, to trust the shield beside him more than his own arm. He does not question why. The pass is not geography to him. It is expectation. In another place, perhaps in a town once part of the Persian supply route, another boy grows up hearing a different version. He hears of the king who bridged the sea, of a march that seemed unstoppable, of resistance encountered in a narrow defile, of eventual return. He is not taught humiliation. He is taught scale. He is taught that empire stretches wide, and that setbacks are chapters, not conclusions. Both boys inherit memory. Neither inherits the fear that pulsed in the chest of the men who stood there. This is how history transforms. The living tension becomes narrative. The narrative becomes identity. Identity becomes structure. Over centuries, the event detaches from blood and attaches to meaning. When Rome rises and later falls, when Byzantium endures and fractures, when new powers emerge across Europe and Asia, the story of the narrow pass remains available, ready to be invoked, reshaped, redeployed. Sometimes it is invoked sincerely, sometimes opportunistically, but always because it holds something essential. That essential thing is not death. It is boundary. Civilizations expand until they meet a boundary. Individuals grow until they meet one too. Sometimes the boundary is natural, a mountain, a strait, a desert. Sometimes it is human, a line of shields, a refusal, a collective will. Thermopylae was both. Nature narrowed the land. Humans narrowed the outcome. And in that narrowing, the myth was born. Yet we must be careful not to sanctify too easily. War is not purified by courage. The men who died at the pass did not erase the suffering of others by standing firm. The Persians who marched west were not monsters. Many were farmers, artisans, sons. History becomes dangerous when it divides too cleanly. Thermopylae endures not because it simplifies good and evil, but because it exposes complexity under pressure. An empire can be sophisticated and still overreach. A small state can be proud and still rigid. A king can be brave and still bound by expectation. A soldier can obey and still doubt. In that complexity lies its realism. And realism is what allows the story to remain relevant long after bronze has turned to green dust. Now, imagine the past centuries later under different banners. Perhaps Roman sandals tread the same earth. Perhaps Ottoman soldiers camp nearby. Perhaps modern asphalt cuts across the old ground. The land does not resist these changes. It has seen too many. Yet if one were to remove the markers and the statues and the explanations, if one were to stand alone between mountain and sea and feel the compression of space, something intuitive would emerge. This is a place where choice becomes visible. That is the final thread. Not empire, not nationality, not ideology. Choice under pressure. When numbers press forward. When retreat is possible. When identity is tested. The men at the past made their choice according to the values they had been shaped by. We may not share those values. We may question them. We may reject the severity of Spartan law or the ambitions of Persian kings. But the structure of the moment remains recognizable. And so the story continues to travel. Not because we seek ancient blood, but because we recognize the narrow places in our own time. Places where decisions feel larger than the individuals making them. Places where delay matters. Places where standing firm reshapes expectation. Thermopylae does not instruct us what to choose. It reminds us that choice will come. That even the largest forces meet resistance. That geography and belief intersect. And that the echo of a decision can last longer than the decision makers. The wind still moves between mountain and sea. It does not carry banners. It does not whisper names. It carries only motion. But somewhere within that motion is the memory of a narrowing, a line, and a refusal to step back. Empires fade. Cities change. Languages evolve. The past remains. And in remaining, it asks nothing. It simply exists, a quiet reminder that in a vast sweep of history, even the narrowest place can alter the direction of the world. Then let us move neither forward nor backward, but inward one last time into what remains after all interpretations have been spoken. There is a moment in every long story when the scale finally shrinks to something quiet. The Persian Empire, at its height, could move hundreds of thousands across continents. It could tax river valleys, command engineers, build palaces whose columns scraped the sky. Its administration was efficient, its logistics astonishing. Sparta, in its severity, could shape boys into soldiers whose identity fused completely with law and formation. It could compress individuality into collective discipline. Athens, in its restless curiosity, could experiment with governance, art, philosophy, and naval strategy in ways that reshaped thought itself. All of these forces converged, directly or indirectly, on that narrow place between mountain and sea. Yet strip away the banners, and what remains? A man adjusting his grip on a shield. Another man, on the opposite side, tightening the strap on his helmet. A king deciding not to leave. A shepherd deciding to speak. A commander deciding to attack. History often feels vast because we view it through institutions and outcomes. But it is made in increments, small acts that accumulate until they alter trajectories. The shepherd who revealed the mountain path likely did not believe he was reshaping centuries. He was responding to fear, incentive, pressure, perhaps survival. The soldiers who withdrew from the past did not believe they were preserving myth. They were obeying instruction. Leonidas did not believe he was becoming legend. He believed he was fulfilling obligation. The Persian infantryman did not believe he was participating in a story retold for millennia. He believed he was marching west. Meaning arrives later. That is perhaps the quietest truth. Thermopylae did not know it was Thermopylae. It was simply a confrontation in constrained terrain. It is we, looking back, who give it weight. And yet, that retrospective weight is not illusion. Because stories shape future action. A child raised on tales of standing firm may one day refuse to yield where surrender would be easier. A leader raised on the memory of imperial overreach may calculate differently before advancing too far. Memory feeds behavior. Behavior feeds history. Thus the past continues to influence not by physical presence, but by narrative inheritance. The men who died there cannot see the statues raised in their honor. They cannot hear the languages that later pronounced their names differently. They cannot correct the exaggerations or clarify the omissions. They are gone. But the pattern they enacted, resistance within constraint, survives as a template. Not every narrow place becomes myth. Many are forgotten. What makes one endure is resonance. Thermopylae resonates because it captures something elemental, the compression of choice. It reminds us that scale can become weakness in confined space. That discipline can compensate for disparity. That certainty of death does not always dissolve resolve. But it also reminds us of fragility. The past was held for days, not forever. The defenders died. Athens burned. Even the victorious Greeks later turned against one another. There is no permanent triumph embedded in the story. Only a moment of clarity. And perhaps that is why it lasts. Permanent victories grow stale. They become monuments to dominance. Moments of clarity remain alive because they mirror our own uncertainties. We, too, live between expansion and limit. Between ambition and boundary. Between retreat and stand. The mountain and the sea are metaphors now, but the compression is real. In institutions. In personal lives. In nations deciding how far to reach. The final image, then, is simple. The sun lowering over rock. The sea breathing against shore. No armies. No kings. Just a corridor shaped by geology and memory. The past does not demand reverence. It does not insist on interpretation. It simply exists as proof that place and decision can intersect in ways that echo far beyond the moment itself. The empire advanced. The land narrowed. Men stood. Time widened again. And still, the wind moves indifferent, enduring across the same ground where once the future felt impossibly close. The story ends not because history concludes, but because the narrowing has been understood. Beyond that, there is only continuation, new empires, new passes, new choices, each unaware that one narrow strip of land long ago set a pattern they still follow. We have reached the end of our journey for tonight, but the peaceful world we've built will stay with you until the moment you wake. You are completely relaxed now, ready for a deep, restorative rest. Thank you for spending your evening here at the Night Library Archive. If this journey brought you peace, Please support us by liking the video and subscribing to our archive. Don't forget to share in the comments which lands you'd like to visit in our next journey. Now, let yourself go into the arms of the night and the silence. Sleep well, and sweet dreams.